iPhone and Android, the only options that most of us consider when choosing a new phone. But just 10 years ago, the choice wasn't quite so simple, and some thought that Windows Phone could become the third pillar of the smartphone era. So why did a company as big as Microsoft decide to call time on its handheld devices? What happened to their partnership with Nokia? And how exactly did Windows Phone become one of the company's biggest ever failures? Here's how it happened. Microsoft's first venture into the handheld industry came in the form of the Pocket PC in 2000. The interface used became known as Windows Mobile, an operating system that died out along with electric pocket planners, while the company's next foray into the portable market was the Zune, an ill-fated MP3 player that tried its best to compete with the iPod but failed in just about every way. And hopefully third time lucky came the Kin, a device we've covered in one of our previous videos which suffered a painful death within a year of its 2010 release. With the Kin already on the way down, and iPhone sales rising by tens of millions every year, Microsoft decided to show its hand in the smartphone market, unveiling the Windows Phone in October of 2010. The new OS was in many ways ahead of iOS and Android. Instead of static icons on your home screen, Windows Phone offered dynamic tiles that displayed live information on them, like messages and weather updates, or the next appointment in your calendar. Throw in a much more responsive lock screen and what many consider to be the best on-screen keyboard around, and it's hard to believe a company the size of Microsoft could get things so wrong. So what really happened to Windows Phone? Despite having some of the best features out there, Windows Phone was just a tad late to the party. The iPhone was already a great example of a closed system, while third-party developers had poured their resources into making their apps available on Android, and didn't feel the need to repeat the process for Microsoft. And on the subject of software, Windows Phone users had to wait 3 years before they could get basic apps like Instagram and YouTube on their device, after the company failed to reach agreements with their owners, enough to dissuade millions more from converting to their newer range of smartphones. And the wider catalogue of Microsoft products had already become less cool than their Google counterparts. Hotmail had lost out to Gmail, Bing hardly made a dent in Google search, and perhaps most relevantly, Chrome managed to kill off Internet Explorer as our default web browser. Microsoft tried to follow Apple's lead by building an entirely closed ecosystem with strict control over the user experience. The difference was that Apple produced their own iPhones, while Microsoft set a very high specification that manufacturers were expected to match. The result was that very few devices were eligible to run Windows Phone, and so to try to repair their phone's shortcoming came Microsoft's partnership with Nokia in 2011, producing the Lumia series that focused on camera quality and eye-catching designs. Although the phones had their merits, Microsoft invested so much into the partnership that other manufacturers became less inclined to produce Windows phones, as they felt their devices wouldn't receive the same level of attention from Microsoft. And sadly for Lumia, Nokia was a dying brand, whose expertise had never been in 21st century smartphones. Meanwhile, Google was partnering with HTC as far back as 2008, a hardware brand that had always focused on larger touchscreens, before eventually acquiring the firm in 2017. Windows Phone was struggling so severely with sales that they were left with no choice but to slash prices and functionality to become a more economically priced option. But as apps and mobile sites became the norm for consumer tech, budget phones fell out of favour, and consumers were happy to spend several hundreds of dollars on a phone that could help them do anything. Microsoft's $7 billion acquisition of Nokia was written off after less than 2 years, and following a hopeful 2015 rebrand to Windows 10 Mobile, development was finished altogether in late 2017, marking arguably the biggest ever failure in smartphone history. Comment below with your thoughts on Windows Phone, what Microsoft could have done differently, and what you'd like to see in next week's video. That's how it happened, and thanks for watching.